So Tony Allen here. I'm Chief Executive of the AgeCheck certification scheme. We've had a few technical issues with this particular presentation. I am going to try to bring the presentation slides up for you, those online. But for the moment, I'll just carry on talking about this particular subject, and then hopefully we'll get some presentation slides up. So we'll have a go at getting the slides up. But I can talk about this subject. So basically, this particular session was about the problems associated with how you manage risk as particularly as a relying party or as a provider of a service that is procuring age assurance systems, because it's not. You get some companies that say, well, we've put in an age verification system, job done, tick the box. But then that then creates a problem, because what you've now put is a potential single point of failure at the front door of your business. So if that point of failure becomes inoperable or is down or is in some way unavailable, then your front door is shut, because people can no longer get through the onboarding process. They can no longer get through the verification process. It becomes a really bad user experience. And so what we do as part of the work we do through me as a consultant, but through AgeCheck certification scheme, is we help companies to understand that risk, to understand the global significance of what they do. So here we go with them. So hopefully get some slides. That's it. No, they're coming shortly. There we go. Should be sharing now, so I just need to click it, don't I? Brilliant. So I've got some slides. So here we go. So what I would say about this is the way that we approach doing risk and risk analysis is to say, right, what is it that you claim? What do you claim to do? What's your actual corporate statement? So you may well have somewhere in your business, if you're a tobacco company or an alcohol company or a gambling company or whatever, some sort of commitment. It'll be in your corporate ESG statement. So it'll say something along the lines of, we require our users to be at least 13 years old, so we deploy robust age verification measures to prevent children from accessing our platforms. That's the statement. That's the claim the business is making. The stakeholders say, go on then, prove it. And then what we do is go, here you are. So what we'll do is we'll examine that claim, that statement, and we will independently, impartially assess whether or not you can justify that statement and make that claim. So we do a series of strategic projects, and an example of what our global risk and ESG compliance, and here's an example of what they may look like. So you're looking about a protection of a brand. So you've got some sort of corporate social responsibility, some sort of thing that you want to maintain the company position, the company reputation, public relations, government relations, any companies like that. And you know, these are typically what we kind of describe as sin goods or sin services, where people are, you know, there's a bit of a taboo, there's a bit of an age restriction, tobacco, alcohol, gambling, social media, any companies like that. But you want to be able to protect that brand, and you are worried about the consequences of that age assurance not working and not working well. You also potentially are worried about the vendor concentration risk from having that single point of failure. And what we provide is independent certified evidence that you can use in a ESG environment. We test that it works, basically. We look at the global risk management strategy, we look at the testing and certification, we look at providing our in-depth specialist knowledge and addressing gaps in the strategy. We take a holistic approach covering all of the corporate ESG auditing reporting mechanisms. Our evidence is accurate, robust, and it is accredited by the UK Accreditation Service. And sort of a typical project, every single project varies, but a typical project might be where you have a three-phase approach, which we might describe as project initiation. So that's getting to know the business. You really do have to get to know what the strategic context of that brand is, what the outcomes are that they're expecting. This is not us going in and saying, you must do this or you must do that. This is us going in and saying, what is it that you're trying to do? What is it that you're trying to achieve? What is your statement of your corporate social responsibility statement? Our role is simply to identify what that is and then identify what it is that you are doing as a company to be able to satisfy that evidence base that that's happening. And it might take us up to about 20 days. For a global company, that can be quite a complex task because it can differ within the individual company. It can differ by market, it can differ by jurisdictions, it can differ by regions, it can even differ within individual offices. Then phase two would be a gap assessment. So we've identified who you are, what you do, what your claim is. We'll then identify what your evidence base is to be able to analyze and map the approach. So looking at your global compliance levels, your risk treatment, your risk management, what key performance indicators you collect about that, what market localization you have, what tactical deployment of actual age assurance processes you have. And we'll provide you with a report back saying that this is evidence of good practice, this is evidence that is maybe a gap that you can address, and develop a plan with you around how to address that. So phase three then is the deployment of work streams of activity to identify and run through. And you know, typically when we do this sort of thing, it happens at a global market and retail channel level. So you've got you know, a company-wide policy for a global company, and then you have localization, which is through the individual markets that they operate in. And then you have channels, basically, as to how they get their product to market. Is it an entirely online world? Is it a strand that goes through their own direct retail, or are they in a manufacturer, wholesale, retail chain environment? And we can carry out analysis and checks across all of those different work streams. So that's kind of an example of a global project. I'm going to talk a bit about vendor concentration risk. And it's one type of risk that you face with age assurance solutions, because you take your implemented age assurance, we've plugged in our age verification provider, job done. We've got a process embedded in our user onboarding journey that verifies age, job done. We continually monitor indicators for our users to try to spot underage users and then put them through our age verification, job done. And our argument is, no, it's not, because you've got to think about online. Come in and sit down there. You've got to think about effective age assurance modalities. You've got to think about whether that is age or identity assurance. You've got to think about whether that relates to how that relates to your onboarding journey. You've got to think about how you actually maintain business continuity and resilience in the event that you have a failure in that point of contact. And that's the global strategic risk analysis that we undertake. So we're looking for vulnerabilities. We're looking for the way in which age verification has been embedded into user onboarding journeys. We're looking for how you would deal with those poor user experiences and the potential revenue loss in the event of a failure of that vendor. We're looking at local regulatory compliance. Are you compliant with what might be happening in the marketplaces that you are operating in? Are you looking at how you actually do the selection process, how you tender for age assurance solutions, how you come up with your pricing model, how you come up with your quality controls? We look at the diversification of the supplier base using things like orchestration tools. And in the session that was in this room immediately prior to this one, there was a debate about orchestration service providers and the role that they play. As a result of this, what you can do by going through an analysis of your company's performance is you can boost your social responsibility by being able to state with independent, expert, impartial evidence that you are committed to the protection of your brand and building trust and confidence in your sustainability goals. And this feeds into your non-financial reporting and disclosure requirements if you are a listed company on any one of the world's biggest stock market listings there. Do feel free to get in touch. I do apologise for the beginning where we were missing the slides. I'm quite happy to make the slides available and circulate them. But for now, I will see if there are any questions online. If you come off the presentation. It's always good to see if there's anybody left online as well.
Yeah, hey, Tony. So what kind of interest in the marketplace are you seeing around this? ESG has been rising in the reg tech market a little bit. You start to see it being added to platforms that were, originally more a bit focused on privacy, data protection. And now you start to see the ESG reporting dimension of it. And I was just wondering what kind of market trends you're seeing around the interest in that type of risk analysis and its reporting.
Thanks, Gilad. I think the big change that, of course, happened in April last year was that prior to then, the executive pay resulting from financial reporting prior to April last year, that was based entirely on the financial performance of the business. From April last year, the non-financial reporting and disclosure regulations came in, which meant that executive pay had to be, at least 30% of it had to be set on the basis of their delivery of their ESG objectives. And so that's the first sort of trigger thing. So now the chief execs and high-level executives of global companies, they can't just rely on the financial performance of the company. They have to also demonstrate their environmental, social, and governance credentials. So at the beginning, when that first started, they all focused on like carbon footprints and the amount of environmental issues that they had, because they were, there's relatively easy ways to measure that and to report on that. But actually, what the legislation refers to is that you have to look at what your actual claims are and your corporate social responsibility. So if you are claiming, as I put on the first slide, that you protect children from harm from access to your goods, services, or content as part of your environmental, social, and governance reporting, which a lot of big global age-restricted product services do, particularly all the tobacco companies and alcohol companies do, you can't just report on your environmental impact. You also have to report on your social impact. So it is filtering through, but it is still a relatively new area being driven by these non-financial reporting and disclosure regulations.
And are there, are you seeing any kind of standardization of language in regard to that type of reporting? In other words, I imagine that, some companies are starting to become aware that they have to diversify, for lack of a better term, the type of reporting that they do under the S and G parts of ESG. So is there anything to help them sort of get more of that information out there?
Good question. My honest answer is probably not very much. As I say, if you look at the likes of people like Deloitte and PwC and a lot of these companies that provide the ESG kind of corporate auditing services, they have largely, they've obviously focused on finance for years. They've largely focused on the E bit, the environmental bit, because there has been the development of global sustainability goals and issues around environment and carbon footprint. And so there are measures around that. There are things they can do. And so if you're an auditor, like Deloitte and KPMG and etc., it's nice and easy to do that, and it's nice and easy to report on that. The S&G part of it is much less developed and much less understood, and so the big four, the big accountancy firms are not that yet ready to go into those areas, but they will have to, because if you want to make those kind of statements about your social purpose and your social objectives, you're going to have to be able to report against those, and frankly. The money and the pay of, I mean, you're talking about multi-million pound or multi-million dollar pay settlements here are going to be affected by the inability to report on those aspects of the ESG compliance.
And forgive me, one last follow-up question. The change that happened last year, what jurisdiction was that for the reporting requirements?
It's in the US, Japan, Europe, and the UK. It's in various other smaller listed markets as well, but it covers NASDAQ, London Stock Exchange. In order for you to be triggered by that legislation, you have to be a listed company. So it doesn't apply to private companies. It only applies to publicly listed companies.
Okay, so got it. I understand.
But you have to be listed on one of the global stock exchanges. So the Nikkei, the NASDAQ, the London Stock Exchange, the AIM Exchange, any of those, they're all covered. France, anything in Europe, they're all covered. So it pretty much covers most of the global stock exchanges.
It feels like there's an interesting research project here that could be partially automated to go through, to basically come up with a crop of those companies, which is going to be very large, a very large number, and to send a bot into their statements to pull out language relevant to the S&G components of it, to basically create a target list of companies who are starting to make those statements, but may not yet be starting to do the risk proofing of it.
Yeah, it sounds like a good one. I would say that some of these statements are like finding needles in haystacks. Some of them are very front and center, and they're like, if you go to, I mean, an example, if you go to a company like PMI, for instance, Philip Morris International, you go on their website, on their homepage, they have their 5 corporate ESG statements, and number 3 is we don't sell our product to children. So they're very front and center. Some of them, you need a master's degree in Google power to get through to exactly where their statements are. But yeah, a good idea to do a bit of market research and filtering on those businesses.
So those statements, in other words, wouldn't appear in their officially filed statements. One would have to look for them in multiple places.
They are officially filed, but there is no process necessarily on the kind of style of filing, if you see what I mean. So they have to be announced to the stock exchange. They are what are called a market moving event. So they have to be announced through their relevant stock exchange. Generally speaking, it's at 9 a.m. each day. The latest crop are announced.